Good afternoon. Let's do some business. We are doing it live right here, doing more at 4 weekday afternoons. We get right down to business with the news-driven hour right after Ben Shapiro. And just before the 790 KBC News Blitz with Randy Wang at 5, it's Mottek On Money, live on the air right now, 790 KBC, streaming live online worldwide at kbc.com. And your on-demand Mottek On Money podcast, kbc.com, Apple, iTunes, and all your favorite podcast platforms. Stocks finishing mostly lower today as sell-off in some of the big tech names dragged down the S&P 500 today, as well as the NASDAQ, ahead of more big tech earnings and a big decision that'll be coming out tomorrow from the Federal Reserve. The S&P 500 slipping 27 points today. The NASDAQ down 223 points. The Dow managed a closing gain of 203 points. We're watching the latest news in the Middle East with Israel carrying out a rare strike on Beirut, which said it killed the Hezbollah commander who allegedly was behind the weekend rocket attack that killed 12 young people in the Israeli-controlled Golan Heights. At least 3 other people were injured and possibly killed now, according to the latest reports. Hezbollah did not immediately confirm the commander's death. We're also following the latest reports of blasts inside a base used by Iraq's Popular Mobilization Forces. That's an official state security agency in Iraq, which includes several Iranian-backed armed groups. South of Baghdad, 3 people were killed and 4 wounded, according to the Reuters news service. This is just coming across the wires now. The blast came after multiple rockets were launched at an airbase housing U.S.-led forces last week. No damage or casualties were reported. The blast in Iraq reportedly happened after Israel intercepted a ballistic missile launched from Iraq to Eilat, Israel, near the time of the explosions. We're watching what's happening in the oil markets, with oil futures moving lower today, a third straight decline in the price of oil. In New York, the price of oil down $1.15 to $78.63 a barrel. Taking a look at another factor that's potentially impacting the price of oil, protests have broken out across Venezuela as both sides of the Venezuela presidential election claim victory, with opposition candidate Edmundo Gonzalez claiming he has proof that he has won over the incumbent Maduro. The area in Rancho Palos Verdes that was hit by landslides over the past year is back in the news today. SoCal Gas now cutting gas service indefinitely for 135 Rancho Palos Verdes homes amid the latest land movement there. I'll talk about what's happening in that beautiful neighborhood with John CRUIKSHANK, the mayor of Rancho Palos Verdes, will be joining us live later this hour. We're, of course, also following what's happening on the political front, and a closely watched election forecast model shows President Trump remains the favorite in the 2024 presidential race, despite Vice President Harris becoming the presumed Democratic presidential nominee after President Biden announced he would be standing down in the upcoming November presidential election. Another recent poll finds an overwhelming majority of Americans believe Vice President Harris was aware of President Biden's deteriorating health before he decided to end his re-election campaign. I'll discuss that later this hour with prominent public relations guru in Los Angeles and longtime contributor to this program, Michael Levine, will be joining us live. But first, joining us now, a giant on the financial and political scene, the one and only Steve Forbes, chairman and editor of Forbes Media, including Forbes magazine, author of numerous books, including his latest, Inflation, What It Is, Why It Is Bad, and How to Fix It. He's active on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Steve Forbes, also former Republican presidential candidate. Steve Forbes, thank you very much for coming to the line this afternoon.
Good to be with you, Frank. Thank you very much. Quite a time we're living in.
Yes, it's been a while since we chatted behind live microphones. First, give us your reaction to the latest breaking news in the Middle East and your reaction to what's been happening since Hamas attacked Israel back on October 7th.
Well, I think unless something drastic happens in the next few months, there's a war going to be breaking out in northern Israel, southern Lebanon with Hezbollah. Since October 7th, they've sent thousands and thousands of missiles into northern Israel. 80,000 residents have had to evacuate, and there's no way a sovereign nation can abandon part of its country to another group, especially a terrorist group, and let it stand. So unless Hezbollah decides to move back a number of miles from the front and agree not to fire any more rockets, you're going to see a conflict in the Middle East. The timing of it we can't predict, but what happened with that attack on the soccer field and killing those 12 kids is an indication that this thing is boiling to a breaking point. Hezbollah is not going to be easy to fight. It has 150,000, over 100,000 troops, not as good as the Israelis, but still formidable. And they have over 135,000 missiles of various sorts. Ponder that number, 135,000. If a full-scale war breaks out, some of those missiles will break through Israel's Iron Dome, and so you're going to have high casualties. And Iran will probably get involved as well. As you know, several months ago, they fired several hundred rockets at Israel, and they were shot down, but Iran has thousands of rockets ready to go. So it's a very bad situation, and unfortunately, the administration's made it worse by trying to appease Iran, letting Iran sell nearly $100 billion worth of oil to China. Iran's economy was on its knees 4 years ago. Now it's got plenty of money for its terrorist and activities in the Middle East and elsewhere.
We're on there live with Steve Forbes. And again, thank you so much for joining us live here this afternoon on the big stories of the day. And certainly, I see you've retweeted the New York Post article that talks about the Biden-Harris administration stance on Israel, making all-out war versus Hezbollah more likely at this point. Of course, the Israeli prime minister just spoke to Congress in the last week or so. Give us your reaction to the political part of all this.
Well, I think Prime Minister Netanyahu gave a superb speech. He laid out what the strategic issues are, what the human issues are. He dealt with all the criticisms of Israel, especially its operations in Gaza, and pointed out that if you actually look at urban warfare, there have been fewer civilian casualties in this urban war than you found in past urban warfare conflicts in the past. Unfortunately, fighting in cities is very, very deadly to civilians, more so than in open areas, obviously, by definition. So what was interesting was the reaction. Vice President Harris skipped the speech. She had a very tense meeting with Netanyahu and tried to undermine him after their meeting. And I think that just encourages all the wrong forces in the Middle East right now.
On the live with Steve Forbes, and turning to politics here, following the assassination attempt on President Trump, he appears to be in the lead coming off the GOP convention. We're heading into the Democratic convention, and now the presumed Democratic nominee will be Kamala Harris after President Biden stood down. Give us your impressions of how this political season is shaped up.
Well, it's quite amazing
Yep.
to see how the reaction to Vice President Harris, after even a lot of Democrats were criticizing her performance and saying she was a huge disappointment. Now suddenly she's the presumptive nominee without one primary, and they're all hailing her as the new Joan of Arc, the new Mother Teresa, and whatever. And so she will obviously get the nomination. She was very smart politically. When President Biden sent out his letter, or whoever sent it out on President Biden's behalf on Sunday a couple of weeks ago, she and others got to him, and he sent out another letter endorsing her. And then she was, give her credit for this, she was on the phones right away, around the clock, lining up endorsements and making sure that former President Obama and others weren't going to choose the successor nominee to Joe Biden. And also Joe Biden was determined. He knew that Barack Obama didn't designate him, even though he's vice president, as his successor. He went with Hillary Clinton. And so Biden was going to make sure that wasn't going to happen with him. He endorsed Harris resolutely. So before anyone could do anything, she had sewn up the nomination. So she's very astute in that sense politically. And the Republicans, I'm a little surprised at how they've been a little flat-footed in responding to her candidacy. But the GOP, President Trump, is going to have to emphasize, as Ronald Reagan did way back in 1980, big issues like the economy, like border, what we can do about it, foreign policy, which has been an unmitigated disaster, and also pressing Vice President Harris, what did you know and when did you know about the drastic deteriorating position of President Biden mentally and physically, and the cover-up there. So the GOP has to have, in addition to going after Vice President Harris's flaws and her positions, which are a disaster, they have to have a positive program like Reagan did in 1980. People want to conquer inflation. People want to see this economy truly growing again. And if the GOP gets that agenda out there, they have the ingredients for it, they'll win the election. If not, she could pull it out.
Steve Forbes on the air live with us right now. Fast forward to the present. Inflation, of course, is the focus of your latest book, which is titled What It Is, Why It Is Bad, and How to Fix It. And congratulations on the timeliness of that book, which came out in the last couple of years, just as inflation was hitting the highest we've seen since the Carter administration. Tomorrow, the Federal Reserve will be out with its statement on the economy, a decision on interest rates, and then a full-blown news conference by the Fed Chairman Jerome Powell. What do you think is going to happen tomorrow, and what is your current assessment on inflation?
Well, thank you for mentioning the book. We have a new paperback edition out, which came out a couple of days ago, updating what we wrote 2 years ago, and a very great new forward about what has happened in the last 2 years. The Federal Reserve, as you mentioned, will come out with a statement tomorrow. And what really is amazing is the Fed still believes that the way you fight inflation is by depressing the economy.
Every week, Michael Rosenbaum is getting deep with someone new on the Inside of You podcast.
Let's get inside of Kevin Smith.
I can go to a movie and enjoy it, and I'm never like, I could have done that better.
Really?
Never. I started as a fan. I'll finish as a fan. And the difference between this iteration of Kevin Smith at age 53 and the one that most people met at the beginning of my career, back then I would have told you all the movies that I hate and here are the reasons why they suck. And you would never hear that from me today.
Inside of You with Michael Rosenbaum, wherever you listen.
And not by stabilizing the value of the dollar. So I think they'll signal that they're going to have a cut sometime soon. But that begs the question, Frank, why in the world are they setting interest rates in the first place? Trying to guide the activity of the economy instead of stabilizing the value of the dollar and letting people do what they do each and day, buying and selling. The Fed's attempts to guide the economy in the last 15 years have led to subpar growth and also the terrible inflation. And by the way, those inflation numbers that we get now don't reflect what's really happening to people. For example, they leave out the interest people pay on mortgages, the interest people pay on new buying cars, used cars, or new cars, and the interest they pay on credit cards. Years ago, interest payments were considered a cost of living and included in things like the Consumer Price Index. Today, they leave them out, even though it's a huge expense for tens of millions of people.
On the air live with Steve Forbes, turning to the tax front, and you advocated a flat tax years ago when you were running for president, and certainly it seems there's a huge difference in tax policy here when you look at the candidates here on the Republican side and the Democratic side. I was kind of expecting a Reagan-Mondale moment at the last debate where President Reagan, of course, advocated for lower taxes, and then Vice President Mondale flat out said the taxes were going up. What are your impressions of how the tax policy debate is shaping up this year?
Well, that's what the Republicans, led by President Trump, have to hammer on, is they want to reduce tax rates while the Democrats want to raise them. And don't be fooled by saying, oh, lower-income people won't pay taxes under what they want to do. When you raise the price of things, inflation is a hidden tax. It's a hidden sales tax. So these big tax increases, just ask yourself, where do companies get the money to pay taxes? They get it from customers. They have to raise the money, and then they pay it to the government. So consumers are going to pay more. Workers will get paid less. And so these taxes aren't cost-free. They are a disaster. They will, especially capital gains. We need lots of new productive investment in this economy. And when you raise when you tax unrealized capital gains, you own a stock, it goes up, and then they're going to tax it even though you don't sell it. That's going to really depress the economy. We'll go into a real bad recession. I don't think those tax increases will pass, but there's a stark difference. Do you want your taxes to go up or do you want them to go down? And I think the Reagan approach is the best approach. It worked in the 1980s. It can work again today. When you reduce the tax burden on people, they produce more resources, and we all come out ahead. And contrary to myth, government ends up with more revenue when you have a more prosperous economy.
And indeed, inflation is itself a pernicious tax, up, about 25% over the past 10 years. What do you think the Fed's next move will be? Are we going to see a rate cut tomorrow? Are they going to cut it all this year? And what is your outlook on inflation at this point?
Well, if they're politically astute, put aside the fact they shouldn't be manipulating interest rates in the first place. Let the market set that. another discussion for another time. Or if they were politically astute, what they would do is make a rate cut tomorrow. Well, but rather than waiting until September, which is getting close to the election, so people think there's a political hand in that, waiting to November is not good. And the markets are saying rates are going down. You know, you look at the 10-year bond, Treasury bond, which was almost 5% not so many months ago. It's now about 4.1, 4.2%. You see it with the 2-year Treasury. So the markets are saying we need and want lower interest rates. So the Fed making a cut tomorrow would just be responding to what the markets are doing on their own.
On the Air Live with Steve Forbes. Something else I'd like to mention, California, of course, known for its environmentalists and all that. But when you look at the environment in downtown Los Angeles, you see the homeless population has exploded. Since we spoke, probably, officially it's down about 200, according to the latest homeless count, still up near all-time high, around 75,000 here in the Los Angeles area. What are your impressions about what's happening on the homeless front, with the biggest homeless numbers here in California, New York, also wrestling with the homeless, but taking a different approach? How would you resolve the homeless crisis here?
Well, you have to start with, and I think for once, Governor Gavin Newsom did something right when he encouraged places like L.A. especially, you make illegal encampments. And you've got facilities where you can put people. But, you know, a lot of people have come to California because the environment is good for homeless people, amazingly. It's not correct to say it, but that's what happens. So you have to make tough love is what you need. Many of these people need treatment on medicines and the like. And so no encampments out in the open. It's bad for them, bad for public health, bad for the economy. And so you just have to tackle it head on. There's no easy solution to it, but just letting it fester and grow is not the answer. And I think people want action taken, and the sooner the better. It's many of these people need mental care. They need to take their medications, and they're not doing it where they are now.
Certainly a lot of talk about the American dream being dead as far as home ownership is concerned, with these high mortgage rates these days. And, of course, affordability, especially here in the Los Angeles, a very big issue. And that's also been a big issue of this presidential campaign, trying to get people into affordable homes.
Well, unfortunately, California, sadly, going back to the 1960s, started to put in a lot of regulations and zoning rules and the like that make it very difficult to get housing projects done. You got to try to get a permit in California can take years, whereas in places like Texas and Florida, you can get it in a matter of weeks or a few months. So, and yet we have to remove construction, insurance, and maintenance costs have gone up. But the key thing is remove those barriers to building homes, not requiring that you build new parks and forests and everything else. That's for the towns to do. But make it affordable and easy for people to build houses, and they will, for all sorts of people. Instead, you have governments here in New York and also in your state where they have to spend zillions of dollars on so-called affordable housing. You would have entrepreneurs doing that lickety-split, if these crazy unnecessary barriers were removed. You combine that with a more sensible Federal Reserve policy where you get lower mortgage rates, and by golly, you'll get more housing built. Remove the barriers. Look at the zoning. Look what it takes and the time it takes to get a project approved. It's insane out there.
Steve Forbes, thank you very much for your time. As always, I wish we had more time with you this afternoon, but we'll have an open line to you, and thank you so very much. That is Steve Forbes, chairman and editor of Forbes Media, including Forbes Magazine, author of numerous books, the latest one, Inflation, What It Is, Why It Is Bad, and How to Fix It, out in paperback now as of this week. He's also active on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Steve Forbes. Steve Forbes, thank you very much for joining us live here this afternoon.
Frank, thank you very much. Keep up the good fight.
Thank you very much. Always great to have you with us here. Mottek On Money continues, 790 KBC. Good afternoon. 790 KBC welcomes Jim Brewer, Survival with Laughter Tour, coming to the Canyon Agoura Hills, September 8th. Tickets are on sale now at AXS.com. Right now, caller 9 wins. Call 1-888-795-2222. You get a pair of tickets to the show if you're caller 9. Call right now, 1-888-795-2222. The tickets furnished by The Canyon, where music meets the soul. Big day on Wall Street with the Dow closing higher by 203 points. The S&P 500 down 27. The Nasdaq slid 223. The yield on the 10-year note, let's bring that one up. That's the one that impacts the fixed-rate mortgage rates, now down to 4.14%. Taking a look at the cryptos now, Bitcoin up about 300 at 66,169. Ethereum down 4 at 3,276. And Doge at 13 cents. NVIDIA taking a hit today. The Magnificent One down nearly $8 at 103 and change. Tesla sliding into reverse, down more than $9 at 222 and change. Mottek On Money continues here in 790 KABC. The area in Rancho Palos Verdes here in Southern California that was hit by landslides over the past year. Back in the news this week, that area was hit hard by torrential rain earlier this year, accelerating land movement in that beautiful area. SoCal Gas has now cut gas service indefinitely for more than 100 Rancho Palos Verdes homes amid the latest land movement. Joining us live now for what's happening in that beautiful neighborhood, the Honorable John CRUIKSHANK, the mayor of Rancho Palos Verdes. Mayor, thank you very much for coming to the line. Wonderful to have you with us here this afternoon.
Yeah, hi, Frank. Thank you for having me today.
Tell us what's happening there.
Well, of course, like you mentioned, as of yesterday, the Southern California Gas went out and did shut off their gas service to about 135 homes in our city of Rancho Palos Verdes in the Portuguese Bend Community Association area up there.
All right. So what is the land movement situation? I know we've spoken in the past, and it's fortunate that you are the mayor of Rancho Palos Verdes because you're a civil and structural engineer, right? So maybe you can explain for us what's happening there.
Well, thank you. And yes, it does help to be a civil engineer when you do have dealing with landslide movement. So last year we had a tremendous amount of rain. This year we did as well. Back in October of last year, our city actually declared a state of emergency because of the amount of movement. Many might not know this, but our landslide actually was activated back in the 1950s. And so it's not a new phenomenon, but the last couple of years it's moved more than it has even since back in that time. So because of that tremendous amount of movement, it's put a lot of pressure on our utility systems, including gas, which, as we know, is a flammable and very dangerous material if it were to have an explosion.
How is the SoCal Gas Company handling the situation? Will there be some consideration given to those folks where the gas has been shut off now? What's happening with all that?
Right. No, actually, they not only they did have information booth, but as of today, they went out and they've been handing out checks to all the affected homeowners for $2,500. With that money, they could utilize it for anything they want, really. But what would probably make sense is to potentially...
Former Navy SEAL Mike Ritland keeps it real on the Mic Drop podcast.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the stage, Mitch Aguiar.
Rest is definitely important, and I think a lot of people overlook rest. I've definitely taken time off when I get injuries. If you're training while you're injured and you're not doing things correctly, I think it's better to just kind of sit out, heal. And I've done that several times where I've had to take time off, and then when I come back, people are like, you got better.
Mic Drop, raw, unfiltered, intellectually sound, wherever you listen.
Get some type of electric type water heaters versus the gas if that's what they have. Also, we use our gas service for cooking, so there could be use that money for some type of electric cooking device because the only utility that's shut off in that area right now is the gas service.
All right, and what is the outlook in all this? Is the land still moving there, and what is the outlook for that neighborhood?
Yep. So just so people have an idea of how much things are moving, there's areas in our community they're moving about 12 inches per week, which equates to 50-plus feet per year. And so land is still moving. It's still moving at an accelerated rate. It does sometimes take many months for rain that's happened in the past to actually have a settlement. Our city is working on putting in hydro augers to pull water out of both the upper and lower parts of that landslide area. And our hope and our goal is to reduce these rates so that it gets down to a more manageable situation where it was in the past, and that the gas company comes back and can restore that gas to the residents there.
On the air live with the Honorable John CRUIKSHANK, the mayor of Rancho Palos Verdes. I drove through that area recently. The main road down there is still pretty bumpy, right? What is the situation with is that PCH that goes through that area?
No, actually, it's called Palos Verdes Drive South. We in the city, we call that the ski jump, because if you drive that area over 20 miles an hour, you're going to get air in your car going over there. It's very dangerous and treacherous if you do drive too fast. It's about a mile-wide stretch of Palos Verdes Drive South. And, that road we constantly put money in to repair. We usually do every 6 months, but now we're going out there every couple weeks to repair that road.
Yeah, I was absolutely amazed by how steep some of those bumps are there. And you're right, you cannot go fast through that area. And hopefully everybody gets through there safely. Is there additional signage there now warning the people that it's an extremely treacherous drive there?
Yeah, no, it is extremely treacherous. We do continue to add signs, and recently we actually banned two-wheel vehicles, bicycles and motorcycles, and also any trucks that are over two axles. There was a situation where there was an 18-wheeler that got caught up in there, and they had to back quite a ways to get that truck out of that situation. So it is treacherous, and there are certain types of vehicles that are banned in that area.
Anything else you'd like to mention that's top of mind as it relates to this landslide? That's quite a dramatic landslide situation that you just described for us there.
Well, of course, the patience of the people that live out there has been tremendous. None of the other utility companies have plans to shut off, but of course, it's a volatile situation that is ever changing. We actually have a community meeting that's going to be on Wednesday night at 6 o'clock at our Ladera Linda Community Center. And it's just going to be 3 hours of answering questions from our residents and get them as much help and assistance as we can.
That area was declared a disaster area, right, by the governor or perhaps by the federal government as well after all this happened? Are you getting all the help you need there?
Well, yes, it was declared a emergency. Actually, all of LA County was declared an emergency, state of emergency through the governor's office. It got kicked up to FEMA, which is the federal government, and we've requested lots of help from our state and federal partners. Of course, everyone knows that sometimes getting money out to local jurisdictions takes a while because of a lot of the bureaucracy, but there are bills going through Congress and the Senate and also through the state legislature that will look to be helping us soon. So we look to our state and federal partners to continue to help us.
All right. For those who are not aware of some of the resources because of that emergency declaration, and that is the correct term, Mayor, what else would you like to bring to the attention of the folks there, and how can they access those important resources at this critical time?
Well, I think that the best bet for people that need resources would, of course, be to contact our city. I believe we're going to look to open an emergency operations center for this particular incident because of the gas shutoff. That does, of course, elevate things to a new level. So I would say that people should go to our website, which is rpvca.gov. To be able to get that information. The FEMA grants that from the SBA, actually they weren't grants, they were loans through the SBA. That window is closed, but I think we're looking toward getting some grants from the state so that we can to help pay for other things for individual private residents. So once again, I would say go to our city website and attend Wednesday night's community meeting.
Wonderful, Mayor. Thank you very much for taking the call, and certainly if anything else important comes up, let us know, and we'll get you on the air immediately. The Honorable John CRUIKSHANK, the mayor of beautiful Rancho Palos Verdes, thank you very much for joining us live here this afternoon.
Thank you so much, Frank. Have a good evening.
You too. Thank you very much for the call. Mottek On Money continues here, 790 KBC. On the political front today, a closely watched election forecast model shows President Trump remains the favorite in the 2024 presidential race, despite Vice President Kamala Harris becoming the presumed Democratic presidential nominee after President Biden announced he would be standing down in the upcoming November presidential election. Another recent poll finds an overwhelming majority of Americans believe Vice President Harris was aware of President Biden's deteriorating health before he decided to end his re-election campaign. In fact, the poll shows 92% of Americans believe Vice President Harris knew about Biden's health issues. Joining us live now is prominent public relations guru here in Los Angeles, longtime contributor to this program, Michael Levine. Michael Levine, thank you very much for coming to the line this afternoon.
Thank you, Frank, for sharing your valuable audience with me.
We appreciate it. And what's your reaction to this poll? 92% of Americans believe the vice president knew about President Biden's health issues.
Well, Frank, 92% of Americans is a very, very, very high number. And essentially what they're saying about Kamala Harris is that only two possible explanations for her behavior. Number one, she's stupid. Number two, she's corrupt. Now, either one should be disqualifying, right? So if 92% of Americans believe that Kamala Harris, who spent almost every day with the President of the United States, Joe Biden, knew about his health issues, there are only two explanations that follow. One is that she can't read things very well and she's not very bright. Second is she could read them perfectly fine and she was corrupt because it served her needs. Both are disqualifying. So the poll is terribly troubling. It's not a very pleasant thing to say about the nominee, Kamala Harris. But if you spend 4 years every day of your life with a person and the cognitive problems were that significant and growing to such a degree that the debate was pretty transformative for everyone's awareness of his deteriorating health, I think 92% of Americans believe that this vice president knew about Biden's health issues. And why she said something is explained either by her being not very bright or corrupt. So it's very worrying. That's very, very worrying.
On there live with PR guru here in Los Angeles, Michael Levine, of course, internationally recognized for his work in public relations over many decades and handled the biggest names here in Hollywood and throughout the world. Now, this poll that we're referencing is that recent YouGov Times of London poll, again showing 92% of Americans believe Vice President Harris knew about President Biden's health issues. And looks like, looking down here, the responses were revealing. When participants were asked to what extent Harris was involved in covering up the president's health issues, the responses were 68% said a great deal, 17% somewhat, 7% said a little, 4% not at all, and 4% were not sure. Obviously, this raises questions about the communication and decision-making processes within the highest echelons of the government, wouldn't you say?
I think it does. Look, common sense says this. A bright 10-year-old could watch that debate and say, Daddy, Mommy, something's wrong with that man. The president's not well. You do not need to be a neurosurgeon to see that his health has been deteriorating for some time. And that the vice president would allege that for 4 years she watched daily and didn't notice anything? Really, that's quite a stretch of imagination, I think, and invites audiences to not believe their lying eyes.
What are your impressions from a PR standpoint of what has happened coming out of the GOP convention and now with a big change at the top of the ticket here for the Democrats?
Well, Kamala, there's a love affair going on currently between the Democrats, who knew that Biden's continuation in the campaign was a certain loss for them. After that debate, there wasn't a Democrat within 100 miles of the Oval Office that thought he could win that race. So there's a love affair going on. They feel saved, like somebody just saved their life. Now imagine if someone saved your life. How grateful, how ecstatic would you be toward that person? So that is the kind of euphoria going on. Now the mainstream media, and by that I mean virtually all media in America, the New York Times, the Washington Post, ABC News, CBS, NBC, NPR radio, they're all in this game, I guess, of just being intoxicated with the possibility of Kamala Harris, who, of course, ideologically fits their mold perfectly. And any contrary thought, of course, is not. Now, if you disagree with Kamala Harris, you're not only a racist, but you're a misogynist. So it's you don't, when you think about some of the things we're discussing, you don't know whether to laugh or cry. It's really quite something. So there is a big love affair going on with Kamala Harris. The mainstream media is all in, 120%. And, of course, there is a lift and some enthusiasm. They're just enthused as hell that Joe Biden's not going to cost them the White House. So that's my particular take, and I think she's going to be more formidable than Republicans would like to acknowledge. I think that probably from an electoral college perspective, it still favors Trump in those swing states, 8 to 10 swing states. I think Trump's ahead, even with the Kamala Harris lift, in 6 or 7. So, but anything can happen. In the times in which we live, there is no certainty at all. Anything can happen.
All the more reason to keep a line open to you, Michael. Thank you very much for taking the call here. Prominent public relations guru here in Los Angeles, long-time contributor to this program, Michael Levine, live with us here on Mottek On Money on 790 KBC. Stay tuned now for the 790 KBC News Blitz with Randy Wang. This is 790 KBC.
Welcome to Talkville, the ultimate Smallville rewatch podcast. Let's get into season 4, episode 21, Forever.
Is there a button we can hit that just skip?
I know. What I'm surprised about, and I don't think there's anything he could have done, but James Marshall directed this, and he's directed so many great episodes.
It's collecting the paycheck.
This would have been an epic episode if somehow it was Lex Luthor's high school experience at graduation.
Binge seasons 1 through 4 of Talkville before season 5 begins, wherever you listen.